All right. Welcome. Welcome, everyone's slowly trickling in. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brittany Higginbotham. I'm with the Institute for Public Relations, and we're here partnering with Edelman today on the findings from the 2024 Trust Barometer. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to Edelman and their team for helping us make this happen. I'm going to share my screen, and before we begin, I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. And it will be available for playback on our website and YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. And we will send you a link with that, with the report and with the recording and just any resources shared today. And then if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat or Q&A tool. We'll have an audience Q&A at the end of the webinar as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Margot to begin our presentation.
Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you to the team at the Institute for PR for having me on to present our 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer. I'm Margot Edelman. I'm the General Manager of Edelman's New York office, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about trust and innovation, which is the theme of this year's report. Next slide. So this is an annual online survey that we do. It's in its 24th year this year, and we have surveyed 32,000 respondents in 28 countries, about a little over 1,000 respondents per country. And the goal of this is really to get a representative sample of what the public thinks about trust in key institutions all around the world. And we've had 24 years of trust. So we've been studying trust since 2001. This is, as I said, this is our 24th report. And this year we had the theme around innovation in peril. A couple past themes that might be interesting to call out include in 2005, when trust shifted from authorities to peers, a person like you or me. 2016, the mass class divide. And 2021, the aftermath of the pandemic, business became the most trusted institution, which it has been for them the last 3 years. Next slide. And what we really found in this year's Trust Barometer is that today we really have a global referendum on innovation in society. On the one hand, there's significant progress that's being made. On the other hand, there's also significant pushback. So, for example, in 2021, of course, we have the COVID vaccine. Then July 2022, Beijing rescinds the first vaccine mandate after backlash. This has continued throughout the last 3 years. And so in 2024, a key year, because there's going to be elections in 64 countries around the world, 49% of the world's population is eligible to cast their vote this year. A key thing on the table is innovation. What's going to lead society to accept or reject innovation? We're going to talk about that in the upcoming slides. So first, we're going to talk about the theme of decline of authority. Next slide. So what we found here in our trust index, we look at 2023 to 2024, is that the developing countries are leading on trust. And when we define trust, we're looking at trust in 4 key institutions. That's business, government, media, and NGOs. And what we actually found is when we looked at those who trust institutions versus those who distrust institutions, the trust category is really all institutions, is really all people in countries that are in the developing world. That is China, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Kenya, Nigeria. And then when you sort of look at countries that are in the distrust category, it's much more the ones that are in the developed world. That includes Spain, the US, Germany, South Korea. It's countries where they don't necessarily feel that they trust the institutions to do the right thing for them. And what are the greatest changes? We actually see the greatest changes from last year to this year in South Korea, Malaysia, and on the bottom side in the UK and also Colombia and China. So looking a little bit further at trust in institutions, what we found this year is that government is actually seen as far less competent and ethical than business. Business is the only institution that is both competent and ethical. NGOs are ethical, but not as competent. And we actually see government all the way down there on the bottom left. They're seen as less competent, but also less ethical. And also perhaps scarily for the folks on the call, the media also falls into this less competent and less ethical category. And government, if you go back, government is actually 52 points less competent than business. That is a huge delta between the two. And what's a 10-year shift? There's actually less trust as well for companies headquartered in global powers. And this is particularly true for companies headquartered in China, and it's declined by 3 points. Only 30% of people say they trust companies headquartered in China. 53% say they trust companies headquartered in the US. That's down 9 points. And then 62% say they trust companies headquartered in Germany. So still significant trust, but it's also down this year. Also, establishment leaders are not necessarily trusted to tell us the truth. So only 63% say they trust government leaders, 61% trust business leaders, and 64% say journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. So that is a pretty significant group that is not trusted and where people actually feel that they're trying to mislead people. And again, the fact that journalists and reporters are up by 3 points is pretty scary, and also something that probably have implications on the election ahead as well. There's also been a dispersion of authority. So not just a decline of authority in key institutions, there's also a dispersion of authority. So actually, peers are now on par with scientists. We asked, I trust each to tell me the truth about new innovations and technologists. Scientists and someone like me are at the same level, which is, again, very interesting if you're a communicator, because it means sort of that peer-to-peer communication, that communication through your employees is equally as important as communications through scientific leaders who might be at your organizations. We can see here all the way down on the right, government leaders and journalists are not trusted. Also, there are some significant worries that persist, and these were also worries from last year as well. So why? People worry about job loss, and they worry about inflation. There's also larger existential fears around climate change, hackers, nuclear wars, and an information war. There's also a trust imbalance. Business is actually most trusted to integrate innovation in society today. So we asked the respondents to say, I trust each with the introduction of innovation into society, ensuring they're safe, understood by the public, beneficial, and accessible. So business, high-income people in particular trust business. At 66%, they trust them to integrate innovation. NGOs, low-income, not as trusted, high-income, more trusted, and then government starts to get into the mistrust category, in particular in low-income. And then trust in industry sectors doesn't guarantee trust in industry innovation. So I think this slide's really interesting because in particular, if you look at trust in technology is actually at 76 points. People trust the tech sector, but only 50% of people trust AI. Pretty interesting. And then healthcare, 73% trust healthcare, but only 50% trust gene-based medicine. This is particularly true in food and beverage. There's a 40-point gap between trust in F&B and trust in GMOs. Energy sector is actually the only one where green energy is more trusted than traditional energy. And acceptance of innovation is at stake, of course. So when people say they embrace the innovation, they're way more likely to adopt it. When people say they reject the innovation, they are much more likely to not adopt it. So again, it's an AI, we can really see it as a crossroads, and where 35% say they reject it, 30% say they embrace it. So AI in particular is really hanging in the balance. And I was just at South by Southwest. The entire conversation was around AI, and a huge amount was around acceptance or rejection of AI. So this has completely proliferated the conversation. And then innovation is on the ballot. It's not just a theoretical this year, it's actually going to play out because, as we talked about earlier, there are so many elections happening around the world. So first, people believe government lacks the competence to regulate emerging innovations. 59% of people say government regulators lack adequate understanding of emerging technologies to regulate them effectively. They're also concerned that government has too much influence on science. They say science has become politicized, and also the governments and organizations that fund research have too much influence on how science is done. People are way more likely to fear innovation when it is poorly managed. In thinking about innovation, we ask, do I trust how business and NGOs introduce innovations into society? Can government regulate new technology? Is science independent of politics or money? People are more than 2 times more likely to say innovation is poorly managed versus well managed. So 39% say no, innovation is poorly managed. Only 22% say yes, innovation is well managed. And then there's a concern that innovation is managed. This is actually shared across income, gender, and age. So as we see here, low income to high income, same number say innovation is poorly managed. Among age groups 55 plus, there's a slight uptick, but even among those 18 to 34, people who would be theoretically very accepting of innovation, they're still concerned and believe that innovation is poorly managed. And nearly all countries are more likely to believe that innovation is mismanaged rather than well managed. This is particularly true in the United States. 56% of people say no, innovation is poorly managed in the US. That is a huge number. Interestingly, if you look over here, Saudi Arabia, only 26% say that innovation is poorly managed, similar to Singapore. And then when institutions mismanage innovation, there's more rejection and less enthusiasm for emerging technologies. So when people believe innovation is well managed, they're more likely to embrace it. When they believe it's poorly managed, they're more likely to reject it. So just look at AI here, for example. When it's well managed, 38% say they embrace it. When it's poorly managed, 43% reject it. And then in Western democracies, resistance to innovation is political. So this is the percentage of respondents who reject innovation based on their average acceptance across green energy, AI, gene-based medicine, and GMOs. And this is the difference in innovation rejection between those who lean left or those who lean right. And what we can see here is there is far greater resistance on the right than on the left to innovation. So 41, there's a 41-point delta in the United States. On the left, only 12% say they reject it. On the right, 53% say they reject it. That's a huge delta, 41 points. That is a massive, massive difference, and that continues throughout Western Europe as well. And then when institutions mismanage innovation, we feel both technology and society are leaving us behind. So we asked, technology is changing too quickly in ways that are not good for people like me. When people say it's poorly managed, 54% say this. When we say when society is changing too quickly and not in ways that benefit people like me, when it says poorly managed, 69% say that it's going to be poorly managed. So again, this is, these are numbers that really, really show the difference in the importance of the implementation of these different innovations, and really that it can cause, truly cause people to either accept or reject, technology and change the way that they're feeling towards their governments and towards their belonging in society. And then I think this is a really important slide. When institutions mismanage innovation, fairness and capitalism are in question. So when people reject, feel like innovation is poorly managed, they believe the system is biased in favor of the rich. And same thing, they also believe that capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good in the world. Pretty stark numbers, which again is all going to play out, especially in the United States, in the election that we have coming up in the fall. There's also a reset for science and society. We'll go more quickly. I know we're running out of time. Next slide. So scientists and experts are expected to lead on the implementation of innovation. So we asked, I believe each should have a big role in managing the introduction of innovation, and scientists and technical experts are the people who lead rather than CEOs. To earn my acceptance, people want to show that innovation is vetted by both scientists and ethicists. They also want to make science transparent and accessible to the public. People feel the scientists don't know how to communicate with people like me. That's the barrier. They trust them, but they don't believe they necessarily know how to communicate. And interesting, people are doing their own research. I'm doing my own research. Help me find information I can trust. Online search is the most relied upon source. That is a pretty key stat. This is where people are getting their information about new technology and innovation. It's coming from their own research. So to be trusted with innovation, people want a voice. So across these institutions, listening is a top 3 trust building activity. So in business, they say, here are our concerns. Let us ask questions. For NGOs, here are our concerns. Same thing for government. Same thing for media. For business, another key thing is to keep innovations affordable. For NGOs, perhaps not surprisingly, aid the vulnerable. So of course, different ones for each, but on each one, it's a lot about listening. To earn my acceptance, give us control over the impact of innovation. And then how do we restore trust in the promise of innovation? Next slide. Demand for business and government partnership on innovation surges. People believe if business partners with government, they'll trust it more with technology-led changes. And this is really across the board in almost every country. This is true. It's up 8 points in the United States. It's up 30 points in a place like Ireland, a place like China, but people want business to partner with government. They also believe that having confidence in effective regulation will drive adoption. So people actually want effective regulation. And then CEOs, they want them to address the impact of innovation in society. With 62% of people said they expect CEOs to manage changes occurring in society, not just those occurring in their business. And then among employees, it's important that CEOs speak up publicly about issues such as jobs of the future, ethical use of technology, and automation's impact on jobs. They want to show how innovation is going to bring a better future. So to conclude, we have 4 key ways that we can restore trust in the promise of innovation. First, implementation is as important as invention. Mismanaged innovations are going to ignite backlash, for example, like GMOs. So with breakthroughs like AI on the line, of course, explaining the science, but of course, managing the impact as well is essential. Secondly, business needs to partner for change. So business is the most trusted to introduce innovation into society, but of course, there's an emphasis on partnering with government. And then CEOs themselves actually need to take a stand on safeguarding jobs and then on ethical concerns around the impact of the technologies. Science needs to integrate, you mind going back? Science needs to integrate with society. Scientists are still trusted, but of course they're subject to public scrutiny. And it's important for these scientists to engage a dialogue and also to really effectively communicate in layperson's terms what they do. Peer advocates can also be important. Sorry, one more. And then lastly, it's around giving control of the future. People want to be in control. They want to understand how these innovations are going to impact their lives. They want to understand how it's going to lead to a better future. And in doing that, they're far more likely to embrace them, not resist them. So in conclusion, these are the 4 ways to build trust in the promise of innovation. And of course, with all the elections on the line, it's more important than ever for to hear this information and for us as communicators on the line to have this sort of in our back pocket as we're engaging with the different stakeholders we speak with around how to manage this in our own organizations. And with that, we'll conclude the data presentation component. I know it's a lot of information. So if anybody is eager to dig in more, it's on edelman.com. You can dig in. What we were clicking to next, which I won't go through, is a whole bunch of supplemental data that informed both this information and then lots of other questions that we asked that didn't make it to the final report. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to our panelists quickly. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eleanor Hawkins, who is our moderator today. She runs the Communicators newsletter for Axios. Then we have Kathy Beiser, who is CCO at Eli Lilly. We have Stacey Jones, who's CCO at Honeywell. And then we have Leslie Miller, who is CCO at the nutrition side of Unilever. So I'm going to hand it over to these guys. We have Eleanor as our moderator, and then we have our 3 wonderful panelists as well.
Thank you so much, Margot. I'm happy to be here with you all. Thank you for sharing those great insights. And as Sarah keeps mentioning in the chat, we will get to some of the audience Q&A, but first we're going to do a quick panel chat. And Stacey, I'd like to start with you and just get your initial reactions to some of these findings, especially given the fact that you sit right at the center of technology and innovation at Honeywell.
Well, nothing like going first after that incredible presentation, Margot. So it's yeah, this is always an index that I look forward to. I had to remind myself 24 years is incredible. You'll be celebrating a milestone birthday next year. And I remember the first time that we used it internally during the pandemic, and it really dawned on all of us in communications that we were actually trusted more than any other entity. And I think it felt both some combination of incredibly sweaty palms because we had to come through, but also it was a point where communications was really looked to by many employees around the world that we were serving at the time to really be their single point of truth during the pandemic, as their trust in almost everything else was collapsing. So this particular barometer and the focus on, to your question, Eleanor, about technology and innovation, it's a world I live in every day. And if we didn't have trust with our customers, with political organizations around the world, our people who actually make this technology at Honeywell, and a host of other stakeholders, including the media, we would be ineffective as a company. So I am obsessed with keeping this trust. I do want to call it maybe two things that I've seen repeatedly. And one is the mistrust that AI, and I say writ large AI, has created with jobs. And as long as that conversation has been going on, and as many flavors as it's had, there is an incredible mistrust, and I know that there will continue probably to be that debate because it does take many different forms in many different industries, and it's hard to say technology or just mistrust. But let me zoom out from that for a second, or maybe zoom in, depending on which way you're going, to talk about Honeywell. And so we are a company that focuses on energy transition, automation, and the future of aviation. So these are all the things that make the world work that you may not see. Every time a plane lands, it's because, or almost every time, Honeywell controls are enabling you to hit the ground safely. So I start there because when I think about trust, that is deterministic AI. That's technology that if it doesn't work, really bad things are going to happen. So I would question a little bit, is that the kind of trust we're talking about here? Or is it more the trust that I can see and feel, and maybe it's related to issues that are very real for people, perhaps in the job space. And I come back to the industrial space in particular. As we look at using AI, and it's just starting, we're behind that big consumer push and all the year of publicity. AI is just starting to blend with autonomy to really unleash a very different capability for industrials. And it couldn't be more needed to unleash the data to make machines work that don't need people to dive down in coal mines and manage them, or perhaps to help the pilot shortage. It's not about getting rid of jobs. The average age of machinist, in fact, is 53 right now. Those are really hard jobs to hire for. And if we aren't able to bring AI in as a co-pilot, the labor shortage and the impact it's going to have on people's lives will be very, very significant. Things will not get made, automated dependencies that we have, whether it's an air conditioning system or building controls, planes, they won't be able to function at an effective rate. So we have a particular challenge to help more people understand that story. And yes, I think our primary customer base understands that story, but how many times do people realize an industrial company touches their lives? I don't necessarily think it's what they're thinking about when they think about trust and innovation and technology. They're not thinking about the transport of green hydrogen to, provide fuel across borders. So I think part of the unpacking of this and why it's so important to raise the flag on the mistrust is to take a hard look at ourselves and saying, are we having the right conversations? Are we educating the right audiences? Are we doing it in plain English? Because this stuff is pretty complex. And then why do I care as a consumer? Well, that's part of really helping people understand the trust that spoken or unspoken or seen and unseen is part of their lives every day. So it's a great question. I wish I had a more simple answer, but definitely the topic of the day.
But you bring up a good point around AI and innovation and how it's not necessarily like a tangible thing that you can market or communicate, right? And we've seen generative AI kind of blow up over the past year. And again, it's being built as a tool, but it's not, a laptop. It's not a phone. It's very hard for people to wrap their heads around. So talk to me, and this question can go to all of you. Talk to me about generative AI and the advancements that you've seen and kind of how you're preparing for it to change the way that you work, and then how you're preparing for any blowback that it might cause with regards to trust and transparency.
Well, I'll share the floor, and Leslie or Kathy, if you want to jump in, please do. Or not. So generative AI, it's prolifically used in our workforce, and it's something that is really great in some departments. Other departments, because of all the reasons people are probably nodding, like we really haven't deployed it at scale. So you've got the whole slide there. I think we have a long way to go as a workforce in general to really tap the value of it. I think you have sparks of brilliance, other areas that say, you know what, it's just not my priority today. And I have legal limitations, I have privacy limitations, I have capacity limitations. It's on everyone's list, but I do think that there's a lot of headwind. We have a really cool thing, it's called Red, and it's the Honeywell color, and it pops up and tells me when I have a flight risk on my team and I might need to pay attention to this person, or I have an open task. So from a day-to-day perspective, and that deployment, which I fully credit our CIO with, that makes my job a lot easier. So I see that immediate relief. I don't have to go check a portal or go dig down in some file. I'm constantly being prompted to do things. On the flip side, I know if I turn my team loose with it and we just start using it for everything, we could have privacy issues, we could have other challenges, we could have information, and there's a lot to unpack there. And I'm actually in the process of learning from a number of my peers and from a number of colleagues throughout the company, how can we do this better, and not as a siloed organization, but as a united function, across the corporate space, to make sure we're using it more effectively and lightening the load in places for our people. If it gives you a couple more hours a week, or it takes a little bit of weekend, time away from the workplace, awesome. It should help massively. But I don't know that we have significantly thought about blowback or seen, given the deployment we have, Eleanor, just to be honest, that's the biggest risk, because it's less consumer facing and it's used more in the industrial capacity.
I'm happy to jump in next if you want. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie. As Eleanor and Margot mentioned, I look after our wonderful nutrition business at Unilever and have worked extensively in the food space at Unilever in 17 years. So everything from the likes of Breyers and Ben & Jerry's and Klondike, all your favorite ice cream treats, to Hellman's mayonnaise and Knorr, so staples in American food. Many of those brands have been around for over 100 years. So trust is such a core part of our value system, not only in the food business, but at Unilever. I have so many wonderful thoughts, and this is such a fun space to be. So thanks again for having me. And I think, Stacey, kind of to pick off what you shared, I think of AI as a tool, not a strategy, and a way to make lives better. And I don't want to ever compromise any part of our brand risk or our brand integrity to what we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes. We are working as companies so hard to keep that trust that we are hearing is high and strong. And I wrote down the quote, businesses are competent and ethical. We want to uphold that. And I think that is very much reflected in how we bring, and again, I'm looking after a business that has a lot of assets in the market, social content, influencer content. We just did our Super Bowl year 4. How a consumer sees my brands is my relationship with them, and how I bring a product to shelf to them is how I'm adding value. So for me, I would never compromise that by rushing a generative AI program that would create an asset bank that could be deployed without a human person having oversight and pure strategy looking after that. So for me, I hope to go kind of where Stacy was going with, if I can save 2 or 3 hours a day by back end functions, copywriting, looking at kind of asset deployment for 7 omni-channel, which for us is becoming huge channel as we think about consumer shopping habits, wonderful. But everything we do at this stage still has human oversight. And it's really about building and iterating so that we're teaching the models how to know our brands, how to understand how we talk and how we work. And only when we feel confident that we don't have a risk problem or a reputation problem by some of those results will we continue to deploy it at a higher level. So truly for me, it's a tool, it can help, but we haven't cracked it, to Stacy's point. And I think we need to, one, learn from each other, and two, be really, really careful in the reflection of brand risk and brand health in whatever we're doing in the AI space.
Kathy, I'd love to ask you, there's so much innovation that happens in the healthcare space. So how do you think about balancing the innovation while also maintaining public trust?
Thank you for the question, because I think it's a really important one. And when you talk about, Leslie, when you were talking about the trust and the data, and I thought, oh my God, we're so crazy about data. I mean, just everything, it drives everything that we do. But it's also, there's huge privacy issues, right? And there's huge regulations being in a highly regulated industry. So that guides everything at the beginning. But, I think one of the most important things that we do is keep the patient front and center. If you're designing anything, you have to start from a technology perspective. How's this going to help the patient or the patient's family or their friends? Or, thinking about that way. And I think it's shoehorning the patient at the back end of this doesn't feel authentic. It feels contrived, and people can tell that. They know when you've tried to say, I have something cool. Now, how do I make it work? Type of thing. So I think it's designing first with the patient. But, I think we're really in a paradox of progress right now. Everybody wants cures for the world's toughest disease. They want breakthroughs. We've solved all the easy stuff, right? I mean, the common headache, got it. We can take care of that. Now we're into really complex areas of human health that require technology. So for us, so you want all of this at the beginning, everybody wants it and they want it fast. They want it faster than before. But then when you give it to them, they're almost nervous because they got it fast. And a case in point, and I think Margot referenced this at the beginning, during the pandemic, we as an industry sector brought cures and medicines to treat, and vaccines to treat COVID-19 in record times. And everybody thought, oh, that's great. And then the second question was, what corners did you cut, right? Did you have political pressure to make this happen? Are you producing in unsafe ways or things like that? And the paradox here was that, just generations of research and progress that were powered by technology converged at that moment in time. Plus the urgency, right? So we were able to take away a lot of the barriers that were there and worked really well with government to make that happen. But I think that was an issue that we all struggled with, to try to get people to get on board with therapies. I mean, we produced, in just full transparency, the world's first designed for COVID treatment. And it was a monoclonal antibody. Now, you think you have vaccine hesitancy? Think about people who are having to understand what is a monoclonal antibody and I got to inject it, infuse it. And so those were things that we had to do and to learn fast. And I think for us, it's really been focused on how do you bring people along on that journey? I think it's really, really important how you do that. And sometimes, though, you're crunched by time in a crisis sort of thing. But there are a lot of ways that we look at this, but it is a paradox. And we want technology to power every aspect of our lives. We want it fast. We want it now. We want it consumer-centric. We want it to meet me where I am. And then when we meet people where they are, they also can be a little discomforted by that. Like, how did you know? How did you know I needed that or what that? So I think we as communicators can play an incredibly important role in bridging that gap for our companies, as well as with our people and with our employees and bringing them along on that journey.
I'm glad you brought up employees, because that is one stat that really stood out to me in Margot's presentation, was just the trust that people have for someone like them, right? Whether that's their colleagues, whether it's other employees in their company, whether it's influencers or third-party spokespeople. So talk to me, again, this is a question for anyone who wants to take it, but talk to me about how you think about the someone like me category and enlisting them to communicate on your behalf?
Well, I could give you one example just on that, just because there was also a stat in, and so there was a question. I'm Lilly, Eli Lilly and Company. But I think it's important to bring it down to the N of one, if you will, if you take the technology and make it relevant. And one thing in the Trust Barometer talked about genetic medicine. Sounds scary, right? You're going to mess with my genes? That just sounds, but oh my gosh, this is where precision medicine and the cures of tomorrow. So you tell it with the N of one, and you do it in a way, I think, that brings it to make it so relevant. And I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, we were on the front page of the New York Times with a story about how we used a genetic medicine to restore hearing to a young boy. And it was this whole process of how he went through this and telling his story, which I still get goosebumps about, because this kid talked about music and the sound of his dad's voice and all these things. When you make it relatable and you show it in a way that is transformational, you start to chip away at the fear that comes with things that sound scary and that frankly are moving faster than we can even comprehend in some respects. So I think as long as you keep the person at the beginning of this, the technology is sort of the how it gets done, but the person is who really, really matters here. And you tell it through their lens, the good and the bad, by the way. The technology thing, if we are, and scientific innovation, if we don't talk also about the risks, we lose people. So you have to balance that conversation. You can't be a shill for the best. You have to balance that with, there are risks to everything. And we're learning every single day about how do we get better and how do we help improve human health. But those kinds of stories, I think, we got to tell a lot of them, but I think that will help us and take away some of the fear, and I hope spark a really good dialogue so that we can advance that conversation and acceptance and deal with some of the downsides as well.
Kathy, I love that example. Now I remember that story.
I was so proud of my team. They did such a great job with that story.
There are not too many New York Times stories like that in a lifetime, so it's a big deal. I want to pick up on your point about the people, and so this predates me, but I'm fully embracing it. We have a way to refer to our people. They're future shapers, and the future is what we make it at Honeywell. And so how did this all come about? And it's exactly the point that you so well articulated. These are people inventing innovations. These are people who are allowing a plane to fly with one pilot. These are people who are splitting molecules. These are people who are inventing a SAF fuel that can help actually grow in capacity and solve the carbon issue. So highlighting their stories individually has become part of how we're helping create trust. I mean, this isn't like the nameless, faceless company. This is, Sarah Rodriguez or Jim Gray inventing these things. This is where they work. This is where they live. This is what motivates them. If anyone is inclined to look at our website, the future shapers are there, but telling their individual stories that both engage the people at Honeywell, but also our customers, like, oh, wow, this is actually how this stuff gets done, as well as future talent and thinking about, I could have this career. That person is actually relatable and they didn't have to work alone. They worked with a team. This is how, like your point about problems, this is how they got past a problem that was a very real hurdle in creating a new product innovation. We invest $1.4 billion a year in creating new product innovations. Well, they don't just happen in a dark room. People are actually bringing all that to life. So it's an old adage in many ways, but it's still so applicable. And I think so important that we don't forget some of those really basic human qualities as we seek to create and keep the trust of our stakeholders.
Leslie, I want to toss it over to you because I'm curious to hear how you guys are restoring, rebuilding, maintaining trust with consumers who are more engaged in health and wellness, more engaged in environmental issues. So talk to me about any specific communication strategies that you guys have enlisted to help there.
Absolutely. I think very consistent themes across all of our industries, which may be shocking to some, may not be shocking to some, because consistency and the trust that comes from consistent communication is really, to me, the superpower to solve a lot of these problems. And when I think about, even to answer your last question about just like me and what it means to be just like me, in ice cream, for example, we went through about 7, 8 years ago this I call it a transformation, but everyone is obsessed with non-dairy ice cream or some sort of better for you ice cream solution. And as someone that worked on the innovation side of ice cream, meaning formulations, R&D, food science of what it means to create all those amazing flavors that hopefully a lot of people on this panel like, we know the science behind ice cream. And the reality is that the science behind non-dairy ice cream does not necessarily mean non-dairy ice cream is better for weight loss, better for someone with a heart issue, better for someone that is looking for a calorie deficit. Everyone's personal health journey, and I'm looking at my friend Kathy in health, right, is really about your own personal situation with your doctor, your own needs, your genetics. And so ironically, and I always kind of like love to tell the story because it brings it very much to life on better for you ice cream isn't always better for you. And actually, in some ways, full fat ice cream can be better for you as a consumer based on what you're looking for. And in that moment, in the kind of 5, 10, 8 years ago, when we went through this, I call transformation, as I said, consumers were in, oh my gosh, it is better for me. And when you have all these friends or so, just like me, people saying, oh, God, you got to try better for you ice cream. It's going to help you lose weight. It really reminded me of where our strategy started to go on ice cream and some of the same principles we deploy today on all of our businesses, which is every touch point that my brand has should be consistently explaining what we offer, how we offer it, what that, nutritional benefit is. Anytime you go to our website to, a part of our kind of consumer journey, we call it, you will find all the information about our calories, our fat content, our ingredients, where our ingredients are sourced from. A lot of times Unilever has been at the forefront of that disclosure and that transparency. So I bring this full circle to say that consistency is my mantra for my team on all levels, everything we communicate. And now that we're looking at 10 to 12,000 pieces of content per brand a year to really deploy across the full funnel, that's a really hard task because we want to make sure that a consumer is always getting that accurate information so that if they are talking to their friend Kathy and Stacy about better for you ice cream, they can say, well, actually, better for you ice cream depends on what you're looking for. I actually really like non-dairy because I have a lactose intolerance, but for you, it actually might not be great. That is my dream as a comms lead, to make sure that people have those choices and they have those pieces of information that can guide them to be that just like me friend for people. And frankly, with partners like Edelman, and we have some great agencies, that's a big part of what we spend a lot of time on, so that consistency is key. And in that consistency sits two-way dialogue. And I think it came up a little bit in Margot's presentation about in that tips at the end around the 4 key principles. If there's now, in a world where we have so many ways to provide feedback, I feel like the world today is an endless feedback loop, whether we want it or not. We try to embrace that our brand, social pages, even our website is a center for feedback. And if we can receive that and take it and build it into our transparency journey, it's actually really good advice to us as brand leads. So for me, it comes down to consistency, consistency, consistency. And, I would welcome any leader on this call to take that very simple thought and apply it to how you're looking at your comms guidebook or your comms playbook, because in some ways you don't even realize that some of your touch points may be out of date.
I love that. It's just building on that concept, that consistency. You talked about what guides you and all of that. Some of the things that we talk about here relate to being a lighthouse. Our job is to help guide. There's so much out there. And how do we talk about technology, but so like related to that is the concepts of disinformation, false information, just the politicization of health has been just absolutely fascinating, to see how that has played out over the last several years too. But I think if we can be a lighthouse, a trusted source of information, and that means, talking about it with full clarity, simplicity, and I think in ways that people can relate to, but also we don't ever want to shellac everything to varnish it. I mean, you have to be authentic. You have to be out there talking about, again, balance. In our sector, we call it, there's fair balance, and that's required. But we actually use fair balance for everything that we do because we want to be seen as credible. So if you go forward with that kind of mindset and that authenticity, we have a better chance, especially for a sector that is routinely used during political campaign seasons and things like that. So,
Kathy, I have to ask you, I love the lighthouse analogy, because you also, as a lighthouse, you kind of spot when there is trouble in the water as well. So I have to ask you about misinformation and what happened with Eli Lilly online on Twitter. Every company leader I've talked to is like, we've got to have a playbook. We've got to be ready for something like that to happen to us. So tell us about that moment in your career, if you don't mind.
That was actually the week I got COVID. So it was a really special week. 2 days before. No, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about it, but just suffice it to say, I was so pleased with how quickly we figured out there was a problem. So the teams really rallied and figured out we've been spoofed before, but I think this convergence of what had happened in terms of the ownership of Twitter, and what we sort of, when the blue check marks changed, I learned a lot about capitalized letters. So they spoofed our site, with a capital I can look like an L. I don't know if you guys know that. And so it can look just like your site. So again, that was really interesting for us. But I think for us, it was responding extraordinarily quickly and figuring out what could we do and how could we go back and to try to solve that. And to realize that this wasn't necessarily about us. And I think what it also revealed to us too was that despite all the work that we had done on insulin affordability, we still had more work to do. People didn't know how they could get more affordable insulin, right? They didn't understand the things that were standing between us and them. There's a huge sector of the healthcare economy that stands between people and their medicines. That's a really complex sort of situation to try to explain. But so I think managing that piece, that was a week and a half, right? I mean, there was a lot of things going on, and we got through that. We've got fascinating stories about it. But I think where we came out of that was, okay, so what do we need to do? What kind of meaningful action should we take? And that's why we launched our $35, insulin program later, about 3 months later, I think. So we really decided what were the substantive actions that we could take and how could we get out there and make that really known. So, it was our plain and simple, what we called the plain and simple program. And so it was a really great collaboration between the business, between our digital and marketing colleagues and public affairs, because there was a public affairs component. But how do we try to solve this? And I think we did see trust rise after that. So we do measure trust on a quarterly basis. And, there's still a lot of work to do. And but it's hard when your product has been used as a rallying cry, because everybody can relate to it for so many years about what's wrong with healthcare in the country. It's not going to be solved with one campaign. So we continue to tackle that. I think we tackle it as a sector. We're tackling it at Lilly and trying to do whatever we can to ensure that we can, get the best access for patients to the medicines that they need.
Thank you for sharing that. Real quickly, before we open it up to audience Q&A, I want to talk about just the moment in time that we're in, 2024. It's an election year. Everything is political. And obviously, the political polarization can influence trust and how consumers, employees think about your companies, your brands. So talk to me about how you think about navigating political discourse and how you can engage responsibly without alienating your different stakeholders. Again, a question for anybody who wants to take it.
I just spoke. I can offer like a really fast thing. We are focused on the issues that matter to us as a business. I think that's where it makes the most sense for us to engage. We are, we're a medicines company. This is what we do. We create medicines. But, you think by the dialogue that happens about our sector that we cause cancer instead of cure it, right? So our goal, though, is to create an environment that helps us get medicines to more people faster. I mean, and that's our job. And so we engage on the things that matter to the American people, when we do US, outside the US, the same kinds of things that are relevant to our sector. We serve an incredibly diverse patient population, healthcare provider population, payer population. We are not homogenous. Our employee population is not homogenous either. We're based in central Indiana, and that's the whole different sort of climate also to navigate. So to assume that we would ever feel one way about a political issue, it would be naive, right? So I think from our perspective, we focus on the issues that matter to us, and I think those higher level issues too about innovation. The importance of intellectual property, about how this is the engine. I mean, it's huge for the technology sector and all of that. We've got to protect those things to keep the economy strong. So that's where we engage.
Yeah, from Edelman data, I mean, it's all about, engaging on, policies, as you said, Kathy, that relate to your company, engaging on issues that relate to your employees, having sort of an employee first approach where, if there's a law that's passed, think about how it's going to affect your employee population. So for example, the repeal of Roe v. Wade, I know sort of the standard across the industry was really to think about sort of how are the employees who are in regions who are impacted, what are you doing for them? And then sort of having that as a standard to communicate from. So it's really, as you said, sort of policies, but not politics, sort of staying away from that as a business.
And I would just build on the very good things that were said. I think in addition to that, it's particularly going to be a time with tremendous uncertainty. So just recognizing what all your people are going through, where they sit here, the other side of the world, there's some, ridiculous amount of elections going on. Clearly, we know some big wins, but we're not the only people sitting in North America who are dealing with this. And I think as a sensitivity factor, as communications leaders, really checking in with our teams, understanding what the vibe is all over the world, and then trying to, pull that together and be a counselor for our leaders to help navigate a great time of uncertainty. Never is it a more important time to stick true to your core values, to the behaviors your company has committed to, and reinforce the things you can control to give people certainty. When they come in the workplace, they know what's going to happen and what you're committed to in the four walls that you're working in for whatever period of time you're here. So it won't be easy, but I think that pulse, it's what we do really well as communicators, and it's never going to be more important.
I'll put a stamp on that section with, I always like to remind everyone that we are in a mental health crisis as a company, as a country, as a world, all of the above. And I think about my own personal journey since COVID, and I have 21 wonderful employees that have all been on their own journeys. And most people are struggling with something, and going back to whether it's related to the political landscape, the kind of cultural landscape, what work looks like today, our jobs, our brands, our children, our families, our being caregivers, all of the above. I think Stacey said it, like, check in with people, period, and use the wonderful skills that we all carry as amazing communicators. One, to influence your leadership teams. If you are part of a leadership team, I often try to bring the comms principles that we talked about today to how we all communicate with each other, so that we are trying to build environments where people feel psychologically safe to not only share how they feel, but to move these agendas forward. So I 100,000% agree. And I welcome everyone on this call to think about how they can step up their leadership with that spirit of just checking in with people.
That's so great. Thank you. Margot, I want to get you back up here because we have a few questions from the audience here. And I'll start with a question.
They look tough. So
well, so I want to start with this one because I think communication kind of sits at the heart of it, it's a question from Sabrina. And she said, what's the definition used for well-managed versus poorly managed in terms of innovation?
I saw some of these, so I was like trying to formulate answers as the panel was going on. So I mean, to be honest, it just asks that very specific question. So it's just the words that are in the question. So it's a little bit left up to the survey taker to decide what it means for themselves. So again, it's sort of self-reported, just like the word trust is self-reported. It's around sort of trust to do the right thing.
Can I ask maybe the panelists, like, how you think communication can help support a well-managed rollout of new innovation? We mentioned human-centric storytelling. We mentioned data. We mentioned transparency. Are there any other maybe like tangible or tactical comms pieces of comms advice that we could give the audience on this question?
I'll jump in just really quick. We have about 60-ish new product innovations a year. So really understanding your audience for each one, who needs to know what. I mean, some of this is really basic, right? But if you just dive in and everything is interesting, it suddenly becomes a little overwhelming. So I think what I've really been digesting with our team the past few months is planning what we're going to do when and making them part of a bigger story, because innovations don't, and you guys know this, but they don't happen in a vacuum, right? They're part of enabling a bigger story. They're part of solving a bigger issue, whether it's the skills shortage, whether it's carbon and how am I going to get to net zero. So really making an intentional plan to attach them to what matters most to people will help make them accessible and help make them usable and relatable. And I can't resist saying one more thing, but this is a little bit of a non sequitur. I'm back a little bit on this last question and the conclusion about giving me control over my future and thinking about these periods of uncertainty, whether it's a new product innovation you're rolling out, like what does that mean? I think that's such a brilliant conclusion, Margot, because the thing that makes people feel less trustworthy, less certain, and just really uncomfortable is when they have no control. And I think as communicators, we are the people who, and our teams can help give our audiences the information that give them choices, control, and ultimately, hopefully, the ability to chart a path through whatever they're facing, whether it's a work or an environmental issue. So I looped back. I hope that was okay, Eleanor.
That's great. Just a purely practical, tactical kind of thing that we've done to help our own employees just start to get their heads around AI, machine learning, all of this world. So we did a campaign over a few months. At every 2 weeks, we launched something new and fun, just snackable kind of content. Like, how do you dig in? How do you learn something new? How do you get smarter about something? And it was designed to be fun and interesting, and so you could play with it a little bit. We've created our own tools and helped people work through those things. We're launching bits and pieces, so it doesn't feel like this gigantic thing that's coming. And we're showcasing the benefits. Like, we're showcasing the outcomes and people who are using it really well, and talking about that. And we, giving our leaders the ability to, how do they talk about it with their teams, as and how to encourage it. We've put it into our goals. So we're being measured on what are you doing? What are you learning? So, and how are you figuring this out and getting current? So my team has AI into, adding that and leveraging it as part of our work. So, and I think we're demystifying it. Again, back to Stacy, your really smart comment about control. Once you see something and you know it better, it's less scary, right? It's the principle from when we were kids in nightmares, right? Once you could turn on the light, it was better. So I think, and I don't want to infantilize this, but it does really, it's pretty simple. The more you can demystify, the more you can show the benefits, and you do it in ways that are not overwhelming. I think we get more efficacy in terms of acceptance and usage, because we really want people to use all of these tools, right?
All right. Thank you, panelists, so much. Thank you, Margot, for that great presentation. I'm sorry we didn't get to more questions, but we're running out of time. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brittany and the IPR team for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Eleanor, for making the time for all of us.
Of course.
Yes, thank you, Eleanor, Margot, Stacy, Kathy, and Leslie. That was so wonderful. And I know everyone in the audience definitely enjoyed it. We are going to share the recording of this on Monday on our website and YouTube channel. I'm going to drop the link here, but we're going to email this as well to all of our registrants. And with any resources, the Edelman report. So just keep your eye out for that. And stay tuned for our additional IPR webinars, one on March 22nd, and also some really great ones to look forward to in April and May, specifically with a Asia focus as well. So we'll send you all more information on that and hope to see you there. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks, everybody.